Bringing a fresh new perspective on the challenges and issues that face our criminal justice system and their impact on all New Yorkers, this is Justice Matters with your host, President of the New York State Supreme Court Officers Association, Patrick Cullen.
Good afternoon to all our listeners here on AM 970, The Answer. My name is Patrick Cullen, and I am the President of the New York State Supreme Court Officers Association, representing the best court officers in the nation. It's a pleasure to welcome you back to Justice Matters. It's a show that highlights the very important role our court officers play in the maintaining safety and security in the courts throughout New York City and the 9th Judicial District. This is a show about you and for you, if you're a member of the SCOA, but we also like to touch on some issues that are facing just working class men and women in New York City, those who are, born and bred here and continue to help make this city operate, sometimes in the absence of common sense and law and order. And before we get to our guest today, there's something I wanted to discuss that over the last week and a half, we've heard a lot of things in the news media, published stories about new directives issued by the New York State Unified Court System regarding the presence of ICE, the Immigration Customs Enforcement, in and around the New York State court facilities. So a new directive was issued last week regarding their presence in and around the courts in what appears to be a search for undocumented immigrants to be brought to a court to face justice in light of warrants that are issued by federal courts in that regard. My question is, why now? Why has this become such a hot topic? Why 5 years ago, even 3 years ago, were we not concerned with what ICE was doing in and around the court facilities? This is a prime example of the New York State Unified Court System succumbing to political pressure put on them by anti-law enforcement extremists. Well, what does that mean? Well, ultimately, this policy says that nobody from ICE can make an arrest in a courtroom. Well, guess what? Nobody from any law enforcement agency could ever make an arrest in a courtroom. And so it just doubles down on what the existing policy was. But it's made public in order to satisfy the craving of a certain pocket of individuals who, for one reason or another, seem to want to bring to light the erosion of the rule of law. My take on this is not anti-immigrant. This is the disintegration of common sense and law and order. My own grandparents came to this country less than 100 years ago on a boat from Ireland, but they came here the right way. They were documented. And when they got here, they went and they got hard working labor union jobs. And they raised their families, and they did it the right way. And so this is not an anti-immigrant stance, and nobody should believe that that is the case. I will say this. This policy does not bar our members from continuing to provide a safe environment for our partners in law enforcement to continually pursue their lawful duties. And that's what's most important, and that's what I want our members to understand, and also the public using the courts. If you come to the courts, we are going to provide a safe environment as we can, and we always have and always will. But the common sense that's disappeared over this political football is nonsensical. It doesn't make sense, and I believe eventually cuts at the safety of the public and also the trust put in law enforcement. What's changed? I'm not quite sure. I just think that the spotlight is shown on so many new things over the last few years that political pressure is put on. We're going to talk a little bit later in the show about one-party rule in Albany and how that's affected a lot of what we do and a lot of what other workers in New York do. But at the end of the day, we're going to continue to provide the services we always have, proudly and professionally, and make sure that when you come to court, you're kept safe. Our first guest today is Frank Morano, who really needs no introduction. He's the host of Morano in the Morning.
Give me one anyway. I'll take it. Yes.
All right. He's the host of Morano in the Morning, as well as the executive producer of the Joe Piscopo Show here on AM 970. And there's not a person, I believe, that's plugged into so much of how New York works, from the political to the working person to the media perception of how information is disseminated in the city. And you always have your fingers on the political pulse in the city and in Albany. And we're just talking about some of that stuff, and so I want to get into that. But welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having
Frank.
me, Pat, or Mr. President. You think your members are a fraternity. The real fraternity is people that are on this radio station on Sundays. So I am a fanatical fan of quality weekend radio programming in this city, and unfortunately, there's too little of it. So I'm honored to be on every Sunday morning. I've been listening to your show for the last few weeks. I think it's terrific. You're covering issues that nobody else is talking about. If they are talking about it, they're talking about it from a really distorted, one-sided view. And you really help to clarify a lot of issues, whether it's the marijuana debate, whether it's what's happening with respect to ICE, whether it's kind of what all these different layers of the court system are in New York. Sometimes I get dizzy trying to figure out, okay, which is the court of claims, which is the criminal court, which is the civil court, which is the appellate division, which is the court of appeals. So I think you're doing a real public service here.
I appreciate that, Frank, and coming from you, that really means a lot to me. And I look forward to having a good discussion with you today. So we're just talking about ICE in the courts and a new directive that was issued last week. What's your take on whether you're allowing ICE agents in the buildings to take custody with a warrant, with a judicial warrant? Nobody's going to prevent these ICE agents from taking action on the street. So now we're just basically creating sanctuaries in the courthouses, which are public buildings. I think that there's a problem with that. What's your take?
Well, I agree with you 100%, and I didn't know prior to the last 4 minutes that there were already prohibitions on any law enforcement agency from executing an arrest within the courthouse
within the courtroom.
itself. Within the courtroom.
Right.
So, I learned that. I saw the statement that you put out last week, which I thought made all the sense in the world, that basically if ICE wants to arrest someone, there's nothing that we can do to stop this. So even given what you just said and added to what I had read that you had said last week, it seems to me that this whole directive is the result of political posturing and trying to politicize the one area of the criminal justice system that should be the least political, which is what goes on in the court system. And, the whole issue of sanctuary cities and sanctuary states, when Mayor Giuliani used to talk about sanctuary city policy in New York, which he was a proponent of when he was mayor,
right.
He would frame it in terms that I think it was very difficult to disagree with. He would say, look, if there's an illegal alien that's a victim of a crime or that needs to be hospitalized, we want them cooperating with law enforcement and going to the hospital. That, to me, is not at all what we're seeing now.
Right.
To say that we shouldn't be taking a criminal and honoring an ICE detainer request, including people that are deported, to me, that's not sanctuary.
No.
That's the opposite of sanctuary
it's
for everybody.
I agree. It's a continuation of I equate it to, cutting a tree down with an axe. One swing, and every other swing gets a little deeper and deeper. And ultimately, we're going to wind up with, chaos, anarchy, and who wants that? Regardless of what your politics are, who wants to see a chaotic society, especially in the biggest city on planet Earth?
You're the grandson of immigrants. I am too. My grandparents came from Italy. And there's nothing. You don't have to be pro-Trump or pro-wall to think that, well, maybe if someone is being detained by ICE, there's maybe a reason we should honor that detainer request.
Right. I think there's also what gets lost in the cracks is that some people may be detained and ultimately released, but it's to make sure that the proper protocols have been followed. This isn't a sweep where they grab everybody up and everybody's sent to prison. It's to make sure that the legal process plays itself out. And so if ICE takes custody of you, you're brought to a separate court, a federal court, to figure out, immigration court, to figure out where you stand, what's your status. And so I think that's really gets lost in the shuffle.
And in your monologue, it was so interesting and so right on the money to hear you use the term political football, because your members should really be the last folks that should be worried about what the politics of a situation are. Heaven knows they have enough to worry about on their own, just keeping law and order. I mean, you see what goes on. Some of these stories that we see about that goes on in the courtroom, some really unsavory characters that they deal with every day. Now they have to worry about the political ramifications of which law enforcement agencies they're going to be taking direction from.
Yeah, and it becomes, I agree, it becomes then the not in my backyard syndrome stops when it comes to something you're not aware of, right? If something bad's going to happen in your environment, what you're aware of, a lot of people will say, wait a second, you're right, that doesn't make sense. But we've become so extreme on the takes, on the political takes, on so many things that now it's like I'm all the way over here or I'm all the way over here, and the middle gets lost. And I continue to talk about that on this program, where we're constantly working from the extremes to the middle, when it's truly my belief everything should start in the middle and work its way out towards the ends, But, that's part of what we've been dealing with criminal justice reform in the city and bail reform, discovery reform, and how that's gone. And that's going to be an important topic. And after this break, I think that's something I want to jump into, along with some other issues that we're facing: congestion pricing, marijuana, and, of course, Mayor de Blasio doing the presidential square dance. So we'll be right back with Justice Matters and Frank Morano right after this.
We return now to Justice Matters with the president of the New York State Supreme Court Officers Association, Patrick Cullen.
Welcome back to Justice Matters. We're continuing our conversation with Frank Morano, here for host of Morano in the Morning, AM 970, Sunday mornings. There's been not a lot of discussion, but there's been a lot of activity with criminal justice reform in New York over the last couple of months. And, we have one-party rule in Albany. I think it's terribly disaffecting for the citizens to not have a check and a balance on, one ideal is what's becoming the law, and so many things are being rushed through. Bail reform specifically, rushed through the budget on something of such importance, which potentially creates crime victims, and again, like we were talking about earlier, chaos, more problems, more work for our uniform services. Rush through the budget instead of holding public hearings. This is a monumental change. What's your take?
Well, I completely agree. Now, just for when people use the term criminal justice reform, it's become, I no longer am able to use it because it no longer means anything, right? Now, we're all for criminal justice reform.
Sure.
I have a feeling your idea of criminal justice reform might be somewhat different than Andrew Cuomo's idea of criminal justice reform.
Certainly.
But so, no, when we first started using that term, right, it was all about there was way too many people in prison. I agree with that. Now, and I was all for Donald Trump signing that First Step Act, working with Cory Booker to reform sentencing and things like that. But when we're saying that now that we're extrapolating that to mean bail reform, and bail reform means no bail, right? That's our solution to making sure somebody just returns safely to court, no bail, right, in many, many different crimes. And then we're going to take it a step further and say, we're not even going to have the legislators vote on that. We're going to stick it in to the state budget so that the state government will no longer be funded unless we do away with bail for a whole series of crimes. And you really saw a tip of the iceberg the other day or last week with this judge in Brooklyn saying instead of the $25,000 bail, which this violent 18-year-old gang member is being asked for by the prosecutors, we're instead going to make this person, this gang member, write an essay about gun violence. Yeah. Well, who's grading the essay? Right. I mean, no, honestly, what if the essay is nonsense?
You're right.
Does this person have to stay in jail until it's proofread? Until we're sure? No, I'm serious about that.
You're 100% correct,
but
Frank.
This is the logical extension of this. And to think that there's no up or down vote on this at all, it's just shoved into the budget. It's a joke. It's a joke.
And again, because it's in the budget, a lot of people who may even disagree with some of these issues are forced to vote for it because there are other things that are important to them and their constituents that they're forced to vote yes
and the
on.
people in favor of bail reform, they should be the first ones demanding that this is not in the budget, because this is such an important issue, the issue of bail reform, that it should be treated like marijuana, not included in the budget, a separate up or down vote. Let pro-bail reform, and I'm using reform in air quotes, and anti-bail reform make their arguments to the legislators and to the public, and let's make a decision on the merits of the issue.
I think that should be the case on a lot of these issues, which are forced into the budget process in Albany, which year after year is, includes everything.
Yeah,
sewer cap laws and bail reform shouldn't all be included in the same thing, right? And some of what you're talking about has also been affected previously with this raise the age legislation, and now combine that with bail reform. You have somebody who commits a crime, the New York City Police Department picks them up, brings them to the precinct, cuts them a DAT, they're released from the precinct on their own recognizance. They could legitimately commit a crime, be caught for it, told when to come back to court, leave the precinct and go commit another crime. I mean, that's absurd. It's the height of absurdity to me. I don't understand why this wasn't subject to a lot more debate. And I think this country and how we formed from going back to the pre-Constitution, this country was built on debate, right? I mean, where has that gone? And it's the opportunistic point for one-party rule to say we can get everything done that we believe in. To hell with the rest of them. But the rest of them are, your parents, your kids, your grandparents, your neighbor. Unfortunately, I think it's going to take some real problems and some exposure of some real problems to make people think a different way. As part of the discussion this year and this year's legislative session is congestion pricing, which I know we've been told is now being termed different things. It's not going to be called congestion pricing because that has a negative connotation. You think this is a good solution?
Well,
fix the subways?
Look, I'm certain. I take the express bus here 5 days a week, and I drive in once a week. So I've seen both ends of the problems with the transit system as it is now, meaning unreliable, late mass transit, and traffic congestion that's just pandemic. So I'm all for trying to figure out a solution, but that's not what the legislature did, right? For starters, the governor and the legislature, in my opinion, completely abandoned their role as elected officials by outsourcing this to an unelected commission of bureaucrats that's going to fill in all the details. How much is the congestion pricing fee? We have no idea. Who's affected by it? Who's exempted by it? We have no idea. And they're going to kick the can down the road to this commission, which is the same thing they did on legislative pay raises, and it's the same thing they're doing on essentially every controversial issue, right? So at what point, why are we electing people? Why not just elect a commission? Oh, wait, we did. That's what the state legislature is supposed to be.
Right.
So we have an elected body of do-nothings. And I really am disappointed at the process here. But in terms of congestion pricing, there's been no study that shows if we institute $11 fee, it's going to reduce traffic congestion this much. It looks to me less like a solution for congestion and more of a money grab. It's another tax on the same people that are already being nickel and dimed to death when it comes to property taxes, when it comes to fines. So to me, I see very little good that came out of this congestion pricing debate.
I agree again with you, and you're right. We talk about electing commissions and things like this. It was last week. A guy in the Ukraine who played the president on television was elected president. So this is what we're talking about. Like, if people can't get it done, let's get somebody in there who can. And whether you liked him or you didn't like him, Michael Bloomberg came from the non-political arena. He came in and he straightened things up. And, a lot of what he's done, I think, is falling away, and we're kind of suffering from that. Speaking of the mayoralty in New York City, we have Mayor de Blasio, who, as I said earlier, is doing the presidential square dance, I like to call it. He's been in mostly all the important primary states, Iowa and South Carolina and Florida and things like that. How is that going to affect the next mayor of the city, and how is that going to affect – how do we fix a lot of the problems here? Because the way I see it, the housing problem, both NYCHA and the homelessness problem, are being affected by what accounts to an absentee landlord in the mayor.
Absentee is the word. If anybody in the audience read Monday's lead editorial of the New York Times, who really runs New York City?
Yes.
The answer is no one, because while the mayor is running all over the country to Iowa, New Hampshire, Las Vegas, South Carolina on this quixotic presidential bid that has him at 1% in the polls, which no one, including his wife, seems to be taking seriously. Only he views himself as a serious presidential candidate. Throughout every city agency, whether you're talking about sanitation, whether you're talking about, go down the list, the Business Integrity Commission, they're vacant. It's acting commissioner after acting commissioner. So the mayor is nowhere to be found.
Right.
A train derails in Manhattan, the guy's nowhere to be found.
Right.
There's a crisis in our city's jails, and the mayor's nowhere to be found.
Yep. The MTA employees continue to be assaulted at a high level, more than you've ever seen
this
before.
Is embarrassing.
Terribly embarrassing.
If I could pass one law and only one law, it would be that politicians should not be allowed to run for office after just getting elected, telling us how committed they were to doing the job that they were running for.
Well, let's work on that, Frank. Let's work on that. That sounds like something maybe we can get into next year's budget. But the answer to the New York Times editorial is, in my opinion, who runs New York City? The hardworking men and women who put a uniform on, whatever that uniform looks like. Those are the people who make New York City run, because without them, the trains don't run. Law and order isn't maintained. People who are sick aren't brought to the hospital. Buildings burn down. Buildings don't get built. Go through the list. The court system doesn't work.
That's why de Blasio is able to do this, because the hardworking men and women in uniform, and I'll add the teachers to that as well, they've made the city essentially on autopilot, is that de Blasio can essentially check out of New York City, and yet it still continues to run in spite of him.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I really, Frank, we could talk probably for hours on this stuff.
Thank you.
But I really appreciate you coming
on my show one of these days.
You say the word and I'm there, Frank. I appreciate it. Frank Morano, executive producer of the Joe Piscopo Show here on AM 970, and also host of Morano in the Morning, Sundays. Frank, always a pleasure, man. Thank you for your help and coming on.
Thank you.
All right. We'll be right back with Justice Matters.
Welcome back to Justice Matters with your host, Patrick Cullen, president of the New York State Supreme Court Officers Association.
Welcome back to Justice Matters. In the second half of this week's show, we're going to talk a little bit about the issues facing the labor community here in New York. And joining me is Dan Levler. He's the president of the Suffolk County Association of Municipal Employees, which represents 6,000 active members and 4,000 retired workers in Suffolk County. Dan, welcome to the show.
Pat, great to be here.
Pleasure to have you. We always have good conversations about what we're up against, and I look forward to continuing that today. Let's start just really quickly by sharing with our listeners what Suffolk AME is about, who you represent, what types of jobs they do.
Sure. So we're all the municipal workers out in Suffolk County on Long Island, with the exception of the sworn officers. So not the police, not the corrections, not the sheriffs, but the rest of the work that gets done out there is done by our members. We've got guys that cut grass. We've got engineers, nurses, everything in between. It's I guess the way we say it is doctors to ditch diggers.
Yeah, that's really difficult work, because what affects a doctor may not really affect a landscaper or a child services provider and whatnot. But that's a really crooked road to try and straighten out, and you do a really good job at it.
I appreciate it.
As evidenced by your recent re-election, correct?
Yeah, man. Yeah. So it's the
fantastic.
first time in our history, ever since we formed, that the president or the executive vice president ran unopposed.
That's a testament to the work you've put in, and having been around when you came on the scene, I've seen immediate change, and your involvement in the bigger picture has been really impactful. What made you get involved? What department were you involved in before you came into the union?
So I was over in Public Works. I was in the engineering division, and I really got involved initially simply because you get on the job and you're doing your day-to-day work, and you hear people just kind of make comments, this union, this, that, and the other thing, whatever, just generally negative. So rather than just fall into that trap and parrot talk like everyone else, so let me get involved. Let me see what's going on.
Right.
So I got involved a little bit, and I saw some things that weren't as bad as what I had heard from people, and I saw some things that were very concerning. So, I continued on that path. Things got pretty bad for us a number of years ago, probably about 4, maybe 5 years ago. Things got pretty bad, and a whole slew of us, across all different departments said, we got to try and fix this. And I was fortunate enough to be part of the team that came in and took over. And we ran because we wanted to fix what we knew was wrong. We knew things could be done better, and we intended to do so. And that's what's been keeping us on this path.
Right, and I think that's the way a lot of people get involved. I think that's this generic take that, to heck with the union, they don't do enough for me, they don't do this, they don't do that. Well, get involved. We encourage everybody to be involved. What we've done at SCOA is create a number of different varied types of events for you to get involved with. Come get to know us. We're as available as anybody. Call, email, whatever it is. Find out information. Maybe you'll come around to see. We just have your best interests at hand. And maybe you disagree, but we're going to continue to try and provide tremendous benefits for you and be there should you need help, whether it be legally or in disciplinary hearings, things like that. So, I think getting involved is the best way to dispel, what I call the locker room. And the locker room hate.
You're like me. If somebody comes along from inside your group and says, hey, I have a better idea than the one that you have, and you stop and you think about it and you say, that is a better idea.
Yeah.
I don't care who gets credit.
Right.
We're going to try and do the best thing. You have a large workforce. I've got a large workforce. There are going to be ideas out there that we haven't thought of, and we want people to come forward. We want people to suggest, here's how we can be better.
Absolutely. I think and part of that comes along with the advances in technology. The ability to contact me is greater than ever before. To contact you or any of our board members, suggest something. But if you don't, then how do you ever expect things to change? Because people have great ideas. I wasn't born a union president. You weren't born a union president. We come up, you hear things from people, your experience, ideas, you put them together, you get the right team in order to enact them, and you're off and running. Not without stumbling. We all make mistakes.
Of course.
So what are some of the specific challenges your union specifically, before we talk about kind of a statewide or much more broader issues, what are some of the challenges your union's working on now?
So, there are, I could probably spend a half hour to 45 minutes just on that. But, just speaking specifically Suffolk County and my membership, staffing's a big concern. Money isn't exactly easy to come by these days. I mean, we're all living in, in the times that we are. And so it's tough for the municipalities then to find the money necessary to get the staffing levels where they need to be without leaning on the taxpayer a little harder or maybe making some common sense changes. So a lot of what I deal with, I guess, just, locally is, trying to find those common sense solutions. Here's how you can save money. Here's how we can, get this thing done that hasn't been done before. Or, maybe we can stop going to outside groups to do these things when we have people inside that can do it for much more,
Interesting,
yeah.
That's great. I think, and you get Suffolk County. I mean, it's one of the heaviest taxed counties in the country, right?
Sure.
And so, the well does dry up even when you have wealthy people, and you can't pay for things, and you can't have the services that you've come to expect from your town, your village, your county, whatever it might be. And now we're dealing with the state, $3.8 billion short on tax revenues. That's daunting news, man. That's not good for any of us.
Yeah.
Both of our unions are members of the New York State Public Employees Conference, which is a union of unions, right? Sure. It's comprised of over 80 some odd public employee unions, and we work together with a number of other people since the defeat of the Constitutional Convention call a couple of years ago, and now we're dealing with the Supreme Court decision on Janus. What have you been telling your members about the current challenges that we're facing as a result of Janus, and maybe what maybe else be out there, including what we just spoke about financially?
Sure. So, initially the whole Janus concept and cases like that finding their way into federal court, from my perspective, I'm sure from yours as well, those of us that are doing this day in, day out, we kind of know how those pieces fit together, and that's usually big money getting behind some sort of an issue to find a way to get the Supreme Court or any other system to poke at unions. And it always was very concerning to me why, tens of millions of dollars would be spent from private industry corporations to attack public sector unions.
Yeah.
And it really came down to, when we sat and we brainstormed this whole thing out, the public sector unions had the strength and the numbers, and in order to reduce unionism, they had to come after us. They had already attacked the private sector. Now they're going to try and attack us, and then they're going to go back, because at the end of the day, it's about their bottom line, not what's best for the people. All their talking points you can throw right out the window. It isn't about what's best for the taxpayers. It's not about what's best for people and fairness at work or any of the other talking points that they're addressing. They want to put more money in their pockets.
Yeah, profits over people. It's a never-ending battle. Long before we came around, this was the fight. It's the fight now, and it'll be the fight many years to come.
Sure.
But as evidenced, they're up against it. In New York especially, this is a battle that we are prepared for. Janice, we've been, again, I'll mention it again, we personally have seen no disintegration of members. We stand at 100% of eligible members, and we're thrilled about that because people in New York either came up through the unions or they've benefited from them now, and they see the importance of sticking with the union. And so those types of witnessing that firsthand and feeling that is indescribable because the work you do really has an impact on people.
Sure. Yeah.
I did want to talk a little bit about some of the issues that we face, collective bargaining, and some of the pension issues. And what are some of the threats you see to collective bargaining rights?
So specifically with collective bargaining, any chance that they can divide and conquer, inside of a labor union or labor unions in general, I see them as taking that opportunity. So if they can drive a wedge in between what it is your group needs and my group needs, they're going to try and do that. And again, we talked about the diversity of my group.
Yeah.
So one of the things that gets put into play all the time is, if we do this for this group, we can't do it for that group. And then we end up having situations where, even in the same union, people are being pit against each other.
Yeah, that's not good for the leadership and the continuity of the benefits that you provide and the strength of unity when you're pitting your own people against each other.
Right.
But that's always been management's tactic, and it's not going to stop.
No.
So I think collective bargaining that going at the low-hanging fruit, as they say.
Sure.
And then it trickles up. It becomes less negotiation and more settling, and you have to put up a fight. We were out of contract 7 years because we weren't willing to settle.
Yeah.
Did we get everything we wanted? Absolutely not. Does everybody ever get everything they want? No, but we were satisfied to let the membership decide for themselves. But we also only represent one title.
Right.
You're representing hundreds.
But you guys like us, you're not going to settle for collective begging.
Right.
You are going to bargain. I'd rather sit out of contract and be met at the table by a fair assessment of the facts and really try and get something done that actually benefits the taxpayers and my membership, more so than here's what you're going to get, take it or leave it. That's not going to work.
It's an interesting point you make, and I think this is where the strength of unions, 50, 60, 70 years ago, maybe even longer, is the ability to strike.
Sure.
And the Taylor law has prevented that from so many of us. I think it's about proving your worth.
Sure.
If we continue to work hard and show how vital we are to a system, whether it's court officers or the New York City Police Department or the New York City Corrections Department or your members out in Suffolk County, if you continue to work hard and prove your worth, then you will be met with that mentality. Maybe not all, maybe some of that mentality, because they're always going to look to save money. But at the same time, if we're slacking off and not caring, then it makes it easier for them to come in and undercut you and say, well, look, look at this evidence of we don't need as many people as we have. We have too many. This is costing us too much. Overtime has been cut on our job. You can't even quantify how much.
Right.
And because they had the ability to cut at that. Let's continue the conversation after a quick break. I want to ask you about the pension system, which I know you're a leader on some of the information. So we'll be right back after this message on Justice Matters.
This is Justice Matters with Patrick Cullen, president of the New York State Supreme Court Officers Association.
Welcome back to Justice Matters. Our guest is Dan Leveler, president, Suffolk Association of Municipal Employees. We've talked about, in the last segment, some of the threats to collective bargaining rights and how that affects people's everyday life and also their prospective future. There's a gathering storm forming around how certain things relate to our pensions. I've had Tom DiNapoli on the show recently, and he reports, he maintains the fund for the members. But we have Senator Liz Krueger, who has introduced a bill in the Senate to divest from certain types of companies. Now, I know you and your union have been absolutely the leader at the forefront of a lot of this divestment of the pensions portfolio. Why don't you just give us a background of it, and then we can kind of get into the guts of it.
Sure. And let me start with saying this probably doesn't sound like the most interesting topic on the surface.
Yeah, right.
But again, if you look at what the senator's trying to do on face value, is saying certain types of companies are bad. It's bad for the environment, and it's something that people are seeing and hearing about more and more. But you have to look at more than just, we think this is bad and therefore we should make this change. You have to figure out how. And the way I try to relate it to people is I say, everybody has to park on the other side of the street. And it seems like a simple thing. Okay, everybody, you parked here, now you got to park on the other side of the street. As you know, it's not quite as easy as that.
Right.
There's weather considerations, traffic patterns, everything else. There's more to it. So what the senator is saying basically is, fossil fuels are bad, and therefore we have to take the money that's in the pension system out of fossil fuels. And I have a problem with that on a lot of levels because of what it will actually do. How we get there. Right.
And just for the casual listener, our pension fund, I believe, stands at $208 billion, and those monies are invested in funds and companies to continue to grow that. I mean, just in the time I've been the president, I believe it's grown $17 billion.
Yes.
So for the person who doesn't really understand how a pension works, the state controller invests this money in companies and funds in order to grow it. And we need it because, I think he pays out $1 billion a month.
It's a huge number.
A huge number. And so, we want that number to be $1.5 billion a month at some point. But we have to have the money to pay it out. So I just wanted to clarify, so we're talking basically about the state legislature saying, no, don't put that money there, put it here. And maybe who knows where they want to put it. Do you have any insight on maybe where they're looking to put it? Is there some ulterior motive?
So basically what they want to do is they want to take this stable investment, something that's typically returned about 8% every single year. And the reason it's so stable is because everybody still uses fossil fuels. I know we all talk about it differently and say, oh, yeah, it's bad, and, we've got to find another way. But just look out your window. You're going to see cars. They're using gasoline. And there's so many other ways to look at that. But still, at the end of the day, taking this money out of the common retirement fund and putting it into something else that doesn't have that stable return, something that has about half the performance matrix of what fossil fuels is, but makes people feel good, that was the game plan. But you can understand, compound interest. You want to make more money year after year after year and make that pension system grow. Only about 13% of that pension money, that $200 billion, was actually contributed money. Everything else is investment gains.
Right.
It is important for those investment gains to continue growing. when the world changes and moves away from fossil fuels, so will the investments. If we change now, the comptroller still has to pay out these retirements.
Right.
They're required.
Right.
So that means your local government is going to have to contribute more money to make up those losses so that a senator can feel good about,
Yeah.
again, I don't want to make light of it too much, but the fact of the matter is when people start changing and the world starts changing, this is going to be a non-issue. But if we try and force it in advance, someone else is going to take those investment dollars that was forfeited by the fund, and they're going to invest themselves.
Sure.
And they don't care about the economy.
No.
They care about returns.
No. So for example, if the legislation was passed and then we oppose it, we oppose it, you oppose it, every union opposes it.
Sure.
But if it's passed, we see an exit from the Exxon Mobils and these types of companies. People are just going to buy that up. They're tremendous performers.
That's exactly what
the
they're going to do.
idea with the pension fund is there's one and only idea: grow it for the members so that we're always funded to pay out that $1.5 billion a month.
Yep.
Maybe someday it'll be $2 billion a month, but we'll have the money to do it. And how do we do that? And you're right. But what you said about coming from let's change how we interact with the environment, and the investment strategy will change.
Sure.
Let's not just jump out, because it's just another example, and I think it's becoming a real theme in Albany. Extreme, and then we'll figure out the middle when we need to.
Maybe.
Instead of saying, hey, this is a good idea. How does the state government try and become a more responsible entity,
yeah.
a steward,
Yeah.
to get away from fossil fuels and the things that affect our environment? What's the slippery slope with this? I think today it's fossil fuels, tomorrow it's toys made in China, or whatever it
Could be anything. It
Could be
could be then. So and again, the idea behind investing. Anybody out there that does any little bit of investing knows. You have to look at return on investment.
Right.
If you are going to look at it in any other sense, you're probably not going to be successful. So
Right.
You've always got to look at stocks that are going to, or any investment that's going to give you your money back plus more.
It's this, making everything political these days is become the norm.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think the next thing you're going to see is not just fossil fuels, but then it'll be plastic. Who uses plastic? Then it'll be, firearms. And who not just who makes firearms, but who supports companies that make firearms.
Right.
Who are the parent companies who associate with it? That's a real problem, because now then you're cutting at public safety, I think, and things like that. So, if this is to pass and we're to see this divestment, I know there's hearings, and I know we're both going to be involved in trying to speak or at least submit testimony.
Absolutely.
I know some of the people that do work for us are also going to be involved. But, we're going to oppose this. As long as this is an issue, we're going to be on the opposite side of it. We're going to do our best. But we can't do that without our members, right?
Right.
I mean,
right.
we need the support of our members to be, first of all, informed about this information, and also contact your local legislators. That helps. It does help.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a fight we're up against. But
And this uniquely, it has an effect on our members, but it's going to have an effect on all the taxpayers. If we move something that's required to be paid out of a stable funding source and put it into something that's not stable, it's going to lose money, and that money has to be made up with tax dollars.
Right.
That means cuts in services or higher taxes. That's not good for anyone. Our members should be behind this, but the general public should also be aware. This has an effect on everyone.
Sure. I mean, everybody wants their hands in your pocket, and this is just going to increase that likelihood, and that's a real nuisance. And as a resident of this state, that's not something that I think our members are interested in having done, where they already take too much.
Sure.
Dan, I really can't thank you enough for coming on. It's so interesting to talk about. I know that both of our unions will be updating our members through a number of different platforms on the ongoing result of a lot of what you just talked about. And you can, I'm sure we'll have some articles and things like that up. Dan, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it.
Great being here.
Look forward to keeping up the fight with you, my friend.
Yeah, man.
Just want to mention that you can always reach us at nysscoa.org. Send in your suggestions, guests, topics, always willing to hear from you. We'll be back next Sunday at noon with Justice Matters. We look forward to seeing you then.